Hello, my name is Edward Clarence Smith, and welcome to Module 3 of your Green Industrial Policy course. This module focuses on the practical process of designing a green industrial policy. Green industrial policies should be designed in a strategic manner to ensure that the policy intervention is as effective as possible. Even the greatest idea is only as good as its implementation. This is certainly true for policymaking. A strategic policymaking process can maximize the likelihood of its success. So let me start with some words about the key elements in a strategic policymaking. First of all, it focuses on the long term. It recognizes that multiple stakeholders are involved and ensures that their voices are heard. It is an iterative process rather than a linear one, and evolves throughout the cycle. It creates a framework for action and clearly outlines how policy will be put into practice. Last but not least, it allows for progress to be monitored and for modifications to be introduced. For a green industrial policy to achieve its desired objectives, it must be carefully designed using all of the information available. Policymakers must therefore take the policy-making process through a number of key phases. As a first step, it is important for the government to set a high-level vision of what it wishes to achieve through the policy intervention. This vision is a powerful lever to align the stakeholders on the overall direction. To work best, the vision should be in a form that is easy to communicate to all parties. While a vision should be inspiring, it should avoid raising false expectations. Once the vision has been set, the second phase, the stock-taking process, can begin. Here, the government gathers the data and information required to establish the necessary evidence base for continuing the policy development process. This focuses on two broad areas. The first is policy stock-taking, that is, reviewing the existing policy landscape and asking what laws, regulations, financial instruments, and so on exist to promote industrial development in general, and identifying which actors, such as government ministries and agencies, are engaged or working on this. The second area is data stock-taking, to understand the environmental impacts of the industrial sector, as well as to assess economic aspects such as the costs associated with managing waste streams or pollution. Once this is complete, the third phase of the process can start, the prioritization of intervention areas. Stock-taking enables a government to determine where the policy intervention will be most useful and likely to have the greatest impact. At this stage, it is important that policymakers also identify any possible information gaps which might impede this process. For example, the government might have difficulty determining which industry has the most potential for growth, if relevant statistics are not available, or if views of the relevant stakeholders have not been considered. Once the government has identified where a policy intervention will be most effective, it will go into the fourth phase. Here, it will decide which policy domains to focus on to make the desired intervention work. Policy domains consist of the following categories: product, technology, capital, labor, and land. Then, the government will decide which policy instrument or mix of instruments are most suitable to deploy in the chosen domains to implement the desired interventions. Policy instruments can be grouped into three categories: command and control, market-based, and voluntary and informational instruments. We will revisit these in Module 4. In the fifth phase, the government will design so-called policy pathways through which to implement the chosen policy instruments in the chosen policy domains. These pathways represent a detailed roadmap for how the policy shall be implemented in practice. The government will then assess the potential environmental, economic, and social impacts of each of these policy pathways. Depending on the results of these impact assessments, the government might be required to go back to the previous phase and choose different policy domains or instruments. For example, if the government wishes to put in place a carbon tax, but this is shown to be disproportionately affecting the poor, the policy may require a redesign or be accompanied by another social or distributional policy. Once the government is satisfied with the policy pathways it has developed, it can move to the sixth and final phase, implementation. Whereas previously the policy was merely an idea on paper, the implementation phase brings that idea to life and puts the policy into practice in the real world. This is arguably the most important phase. Often it is also the most challenging part. Good institutions, cooperation among ministries at the national and subnational level, and a sufficient amount of resources will be required to ensure that policy implementation is a success. Let me finish by mentioning some cross-cutting issues that will need to be considered in the process. The first relates to stakeholder involvement. Before even starting the policy-making process, all relevant stakeholders must be identified. This includes not only those in government, but also those representing the private sector and civil society. The government must then consult with these stakeholders throughout the policy-making process and ensure that their views are addressed to the greatest extent possible. The second relates to skills and management capabilities. Developing and implementing smart green industrial policies will require skilled government staff. To address potential skill gaps, governments may build capacity via various channels, including international and donor organizations, qualified consultants, think tanks, and universities. To this end, policy implementation may require comprehensive training and skills development at national level. This consideration should be factored into the policy-making process. The final cross-cutting issue relates to gender. Gender consideration should be mainstreamed throughout the entire policy-making process. This is important to ensure that the positive or negative impacts of a policy do not disproportionately affect one gender, and if they do, that these impacts are addressed. To do so, gender disaggregated data should be collected and gender analysis conducted during every phase of the process. Where necessary, gender-specific targets and mitigative actions should be developed. With that, I leave you to your detailed studies, and I will see you again when you start Module 4. Good luck!